Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Enns. I'm Senior Fellow in Biblical Studies at the BioLogos Foundation, and we're here today with the Reverend Dr. Tom Wright, and we have a chance to ask some questions, some of which we've gotten via Twitter and emails, and also about a lot of topics such as his recent book, After You Believe, and science and faith issues. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Now into sort of science and faith discussion specifically, and there are many questions about this. But one question is, if you take Genesis in a non-literal fashion, especially the creation stories, why take anything in the Bible literally, like, say, the Gospels? Do you take the Gospels literally?
I want to say that the word literal is confusing. The word literal, like the word metaphorical, is actually a word which refers to the way that words refer to things. Whereas what we often mean is the distinction between concrete and abstract. Concrete being something definite, physical, substantial, abstract being like an idea. Now you can refer metaphorically to something concrete. If I call my car the old tin can, that's a metaphorical reference to something that is definitely solid. Or you can refer literally to something abstract. If I say Plato's theory of forms, that theory is itself an abstraction, and the forms are themselves abstract, and it's doubly abstract, but I'm referring literally to it. So when we say, is Genesis to be taken literally, what I want to say is that doesn't settle ahead of time the question of what it actually refers to. And when we are reading any text, it ought to be an open question. What does this text intend to refer to, and how does it intend to refer to it? And famously, when you read in the Gospels, Jesus saying there was a man who had two sons and the younger one took the cash and ran and then came back, etc., etc. It makes no sense for a reader of the Gospels to say, I need to know where this farm was. I want to know what the name of that father was. Can I go and visit him? Or could you have done at the time? That's just, Jesus himself and his first hearers would have said, don't be silly. That's a parable. So I want to say that you've got to go case by case. When it says Jesus was crucified, it really means Jesus was crucified. That isn't a subtle metaphor for something else. But when Jesus himself tells a parable, the point is not that this actually happened somewhere and we're drawing lessons from it. The point is this is a cheerfully fictitious story, but often the real meaning remains concrete. If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they believe even if one should rise from the dead. And the concrete application of that is, if you've got a poor man covered in sores by your gate, you ought to be looking after him. So it's a much more interesting and complicated question than your culture and mine has ever allowed us to get into by this literal, non-literal split. So when you go back to Genesis with all of that, I really want to know, what did the writer of Genesis, or the people who wrote the bits and pieces which came together as Genesis, what did they intend to do by this story? And as we know from various people, telling a story about somebody who constructs something in 6 days, it's a temple story. It's about God making a place for himself to dwell, and this is heaven and earth. And what you do with that is, the last thing is you put an image of the God into this temple. And suddenly, Genesis 1, instead of it being were there 6 days or were there 5 or were there 7 or were there 24 hours, it's actually about God making heavens and the earth as the place where he wants to dwell, and putting humans into that construct as a way of both reflecting his own love into the world and drawing out the praise and glory from the world back to himself. And that's the literal meaning of Genesis. And the question of the formal structure has to sit around that as best it can.